All right, you all got a notification. Good morning, everybody. This is the August 2nd Dayton is Yours meeting, our most popular one to date. As I mentioned earlier, we do, as I feel like I say every time, but this is a daytime meeting, and we certainly appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. I do record these meetings. One of the benefit of virtual meetings is we can easily record. I had a record number of folks emailing me that said they wouldn't be able to attend, but they really wanted to watch the meeting. So that's why we're recording. Gotten positive feedback about being able to view these later. I will mention just on the news front, tonight is National Night Out. There are events going on across the city. The kind of traditional police caravan is going to Twin Towers, Old North Dayton, Residence Park, and then Westwood. You can check out the city's social media page on Facebook or Twitter to see the schedule of events. And then I know of at least Wright Dunbar and Huffman, among probably others that are having events as well. So definitely encourage you to go out if you're available tonight. Most if not all places have food, so take your families and go meet some new neighbors. With that said, as you all know, today we're talking about housing inspection, which is a very popular topic in our neighborhoods. So we have our Deputy Director of our department, Steve Gondol, and Carl Daugherty, Division Manager, with us this morning. And I'm not going to talk much. I'm going to let them take the show. And so what I would say is just kind of like our normal format. We'll let Steve and Carl present, and then we can take questions after with the time that we have. And then obviously, as you all are leaders in your community and in your neighborhoods, you can always reach out to us. Even if your question isn't answered this morning, you can definitely reach out to us at any time and be happy to follow up on any questions that aren't answered. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Steve and Carl.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Again, like Mike said, thank you for making the time to be here. Hopefully, what we are providing is in a bit what we promised back at the start of 2022, and delivering on some of the changes that we were bringing to housing inspection, transparency with our work, and just some, all around just more efficient responses to the concerns in your neighborhood. So starting off, I want to talk a little bit about the housing inspection team. There's been a lot of changes in the past year. So we saw the retirement of two longtime housing inspection supervisors. Don Long retired in December of 21. Nathan Zabrowski retired in March. And so what that did was that left open the opportunity for some new leadership to step up. And we found that in Donnell Gary, who had been in housing inspection, returned to us from Public Works as a conservation supervisor, and James McDaniel, who had been really in the Edgemont neighborhood and the Twin Towers, was the other conservation supervisor. So for the first time in a long time, I would say almost since I've been here, having a division manager and two conservation supervisors that are in place is a milestone. In addition to that, we are fairly almost fully staffed up on the housing inspection side. We welcomed our latest inspector, Larry Marks. He joined us from water. And he's been with us a little over a month now. And with James McDaniel moving from conservation specialist to supervisor, that actually opens up the last and final position. So we will be, civil service will be reaching out to the candidate on that list to fill that. So to be fully staffed across both the specialist, supervisors, and leadership is huge. And one of the reasons I think that we're seeing is that really addressing the backlog. One of the simplest ways I can put it is that this time last year, we were facing upwards to probably 3,000 unaddressed complaints in terms of how understaffed we were. And as of last week, we are down to about 100. And I mean, they're routine, and I'll show you in a second here. So truly, people matter. Having and also having inspectors move beyond that learning curve. And so we are now faced with our last kind of big group is really nearing, are really kind of figuring it out and able to kind of get out there. And so we're seeing significant advancements and being able to respond within sometimes the same day to urgent or serious complaints brought to us, and just more routine ones. So that's huge. That we are. I feel that we're able to be responsive. I'm going to share my screen and just kind of show you a little bit of the breakout. I will kind of do the disclaimer that with Larry and the next inspector coming on, this will adjust a little bit in terms of placement, but for the most part, the teams are fairly set in terms of the geographical areas they serve. And if you remember, we were moving through with under Carl's kind of leadership, this unified team approach. And so whereas before we had inspectors assigned to individual neighborhoods and not always in the same geographic footprint, like James McDaniel, for example, was Edgemont and then over to Twin Towers. And so changing that around based off the feedback we heard from you all, the feedback we heard from the inspectors about, what's working, what's not working, is moving to this teams model. It allows us, and again, I figured since the last time I shared this was either way back in the beginning of 22 or at one of the president's forums. We were facing a thing where if an inspector was out on an extended leave for medical reasons, whatever, it wasn't that we weren't covering that area, but we were only getting to it when there was capacity with another inspector to get out there. And so finding that that we just were creating some really daunting work issues. The teams model now puts at least 4 inspectors on a team, so that, and each inspector is kind of then given a neighborhood, but it doesn't mean that they are solely responsible, that they can call on one of their other team members to help assist them. Sometimes we'll put the whole team on something if we're doing a sweep in a neighborhood. And so the feeling is that they are no longer just kind of on an island, that it is a team approach. We wanted to build leadership among the conservation specialists so that they can begin their days and their weeks talking through issues facing their geography, how they want to go about that, relying on the breakdown of the group. So we intentionally made it that it was, we didn't put all the senior inspectors on one team. We made sure that we broke them apart across the 4 teams, and then try to layer the teams with individuals based off their seniority or their experience, so that you had new people tiered up with mid-level, tiered up with more senior people, so that there would always be more of a more senior person on the team that they could go to. Then you had, and then kind of then matching that with the middle tier, and then obviously the new. Truth be told, most of our inspectors are new. So there is, if your neighborhood is rooting for a more senior team, I will tell you now that doesn't exist. Between the VSP that we've talked a lot about and other retirements, we really have a really new, young to the city team. And so there is not, no one district has an advantage over the other. So so with that in mind, we worked with the supervisors trying to identify people's knowledge and abilities and team dynamics and needs of the geography. So with that, I'm gonna share. Okay. So like I said, this will be updated with the final placement for Larry Marks and the final placement of the newest inspector. But you'll see here, starting with the West team, for those we have Shannon Steps, Jason Phillips, Danielle Simpson, and John Carter on the West team. And obviously you can see who is assigned to which neighborhood, which planning staff member is assigned to that area, as well as the community engagement staff member. And there's a few holes here and there based off of some staff movement. And again, this is the thing that I'll be working with Mike and Verletta's team on, filling in the gaps for some of the changes that we had among the teams. But so you'll see here though that, again, just because Jason Phillips is dedicated to Highview Hills doesn't mean that Shannon or Danielle can't cover for him if he's on a 2-week vacation. It's just, we did want to give a little bit of a continuity within the neighborhood. So having each one be like a subject matter expert for that neighborhood, but not the sole one, so that they are. And so by them working together, we already know that all of them have been out in Westwood doing a sweep of a project over there. So they are getting around to the different communities, even if it's not their specifically assigned area. And again, the reason being is that the whole West is their focus area. And so they are there to help cover for their colleagues when needed. Moving down to the east, we have James Barnett, Sarah Pesh, Daniel Brothers, Rick Lovelace, and then again with the associated planners and CE staff. With this group, we have added temporarily, Larry Marks has been working in the east. Reason being is Rick Lovelace had been a temporary and interim supervisor. And so in addition to kind of toggling with his neighborhoods as well as supervisory duties, we added Larry there to kind of help ease some of the issues in there while Rick was doing both roles. So Larry has been working alongside Rick in Belmont, Hearthstone, Eastmont, Walnut Hills. So, now that Rick has returned fully on to a conservation specialist position, again, we're going to kind of evaluate how long Larry might stay in the East permanently or temporarily based off our need. But, he has been focusing on that area there. In the North, we have Cliff Nelson, Josh Loudermilk, Robert Crow, and Michael Edwards. This group, I say surprisingly, I think they have maybe not the most, they all have a lot of work to do, but there is a lot of need in this area. This area was viewed, I think, for a long time as, that's always been a safe, stable area. We don't really have to it's probably good. And so going back through some of the records, we realized that it wasn't getting the attention it deserved or needed. And so dedicating this group to that area to really get back out onto the streets and really give an assessment of where some of these communities are, because I think a lot of reasons that there's a little bit of they had always been strong, stable neighborhoods. And so I'm sure they're fine. And really what the need is that in some of these, there had been a lot of overlooked or needed attention. And so this group has really been busy getting out there, getting into the community. I know that when I did the mayor's canvas and conversation event in Mount Vernon, in addition to hearing about complaints, I was really impressed that they were referencing Josh Loudermilk by name and also by experience of he's engaging with them, talking to them. They knew his name. And I mean, that's one of the things that really we had hoped for, is that we are not out here just to write up tickets or citations, slap it on the door and run away. Engage. And so hearing the people actually say, like, Josh talked to me about this, or we're working on this, is huge, because that is a big part, is that not just being present, but engaging in the community. And so hearing Mount Vernon talk about Josh's engagement with them was really positive. So this group, like I said, yeah, they're really going to get out there. Cliff was with me at the Princeton Heights Canvas Conversation meeting. Same thing, really get him out there, having the community get to know him as they see him out there, but realize that if it's not him, it might be one of these other three, that it's all still part of that North team. Then in the greater downtown, we have, this might be viewed as more of our veteran team in a way, John Zabrowski and Mike Weinkoff and John Carter. Reason being is John and Mike have been really our historic district inspectors. And so, whereas I mentioned that there was no one team kind of loaded up, this might be maybe one exception, but it wasn't based off, it was more based off that when we laid out these districts, we made a focus to kind of put all of the historic districts into kind of one, just the way it lays in the city. There's a few areas, I know for Bill, Marvin, we have a few areas, obviously, in Five Oaks that are historic, that are just outside here, which doesn't mean that they're not going to get the attention they need from historic. Those inspectors can always bring John or Mike in for additional consultation if it is a property in one of the historic districts in Five Oaks. But as you can see, they are here because they have the bulk of all of our historic districts. In addition to some of our others. So John is picking up University Park, Schroyer Park, Patterson Park. So John is probably the one inspector that actually is in more than one area. And the reason being is that John Carter, from previous DIYs, you might recall, is actually also takes on a couple of different programs for us. He manages our vacant property registration program, our property disclosure program, as well as being on the court team. So we are mindful that we needed John here in the office about, a certain percentage of the time. So we limited how many neighborhoods we gave him so that we weren't kind of creating an unreasonable balance. So, but all in all, we're pretty happy. The results we're getting from the teams is that they're working well together. They're really getting situated in their neighborhoods. I know that working with community engagement, we are getting the inspectors out to the neighborhood meetings. I know Danielle Simpson and James McDaniel went to the Lakeview meeting with Rachel and Verletta. And so that is something that we will arrange when possible. Having the inspector come out the meeting. Now, be mindful, they part of our union labor staff, and we do need to kind of make some arrangements. Obviously, any evening meetings are considered overtime, which is fine. But what like Rachel and Verletta did was that we just asked that they go early on in the meeting to either present kind of what they've been up to hear from the community, but that they are not last on the agenda so that they're sitting through the whole meeting. So that's just something that if you feel you'd like to have your inspector or if needed a supervisor at the meeting, just coordinate that with your community engagement staff and Verletta so that we can make the proper arrangements to do that. So on that point, on that note, is there any questions about the teams, individuals, assignments?
Fred,
I didn't see Denny Zimmer and Ken Jackson on this list. What's
So good point. So they are our nuisance staff. And so they're what we've done is they are typically throughout the city, but one of the things you'll see this last column here, or maybe hopefully you all see it. We are going, since we have 4 nuisance abatement specialists on Denny's team, we are going to place a point of contact, one of those individuals to be a service to that team. But the nuisance team, their work, depending on the project, is scattered throughout the city. When we looked in like trying to put them in a certain geography just didn't work. So what we're doing is they're going to be a resource for their conservation specialist colleagues, planning and CE staff, but their work will transcend the whole city. So but we thought that providing that nuisance insight to these teams would be helpful. And that's one last step that we have to do is that to put them on there. So yeah, so you that will be coming soon. But like I said, you will see, even if, let's say for the West, your nuisance person is Mark Mueller. If it is a pretty significant project that Ken's overseeing, then we might send Ken out and to address the community. So it wouldn't be that just because Mark said it, depending on the project, we always defer to which specialist is handling that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Anyone else? Because I have more things that I can jump to if we're good at that point. And I see Carl's on. I don't know, Carl, did you want to have anything you wanted to add to that conversation about the teams?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the one thing I would underscore that Steve touched upon is of our roughly 15 inspectors, 9 of them have a tenure of service of under 2 years. So there is a level of, not a high level of experience. So there's a lot of training going on, with that infusion of young staff. There is quite a bit of a high level of energy, though, that these people bring to the job. I'd be happy to touch. I know demo is always a topic of interest. I don't know, Steve, if you want me to move into a little bit of discussion about some of our preparations and some of our efforts related to demo.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing at that moment just so you can kind of, there we go.
Okay. So I know everybody is familiar with the much discussed American Rescue Program. The city was a recipient of something like $135 million total from Washington, and roughly $14 million of that amount is earmarked for demolition and to a lesser extent stabilization. We've earmarked about $2.4 million that would go towards stabilization of structures. So we obviously we're putting a great deal of effort into properties that will figure into demolition, of which there are many. We've added somewhere around 450 structures to our nuisance list over probably the last 6 months. It's up around 14, between probably 14 and 1,500 structures. And we're continuing to certify more structures. Obviously that's, in the best of worlds, that's not the preferred course to take down a lot of structures. But our reality is that there are a number of structures that are, long past the point of being able to save. There are also some that, are very salvageable, and we're looking to identify those for that purpose where possible. So I mentioned the American Rescue Program. That has not been fully laid out yet by Washington, but we're preparing for it, as the other departments are, who are also recipients, as well as external recipients of ARPA. A second source of external demolition funding is through the Ohio Department of Development. And we, through Montgomery County and the Montgomery County Land Bank, are the recipients of $500,000 that we share with some of the surrounding communities in Montgomery County. We have put some of those dollars to use already. For those who live and are most familiar with North, there were several structures on North Main Street, 1824 North Main Street, which was a very blight-ridden multi-family structure that we were able to take down, along with 2 other structures contiguously located there. The hope is that I believe statewide, this Ohio Department of Development fund is something like $150 million. And the thought is that there's going to be a sort of a second phase award. And our hope would be to receive several $1 million in demolition funding through ODOD. And then we have our internal sources of demolition through Community Development Block Grant, as well as general fund. But the bulk of our demolition, is intended and will occur through those 2 external sources of funding, as mentioned. Our approach as it relates to demolition, there's, depending upon the program, there are different qualifying requirements. But I think we take sort of a corridor approach, sort of an outside in approach in some cases. North Main, for example, we've identified about 12 to 14 structures on the North Main Street corridor from roughly Great Miami Boulevard to the northern city limits, just beyond Siebenthaler Avenue. Structures that are highly visible, highly blight-ridden, and whose elimination will have what we believe to be pretty significant, pretty profound impact, in terms of restoring North Main Street as a more positive image way for the city. The neighborhoods that surround the North Main Street corridor, they by and large are relatively stable. We talk about the Hillcrest Planning District, which includes the Sandalwood Park area to the north and the Hillview area on the south side of Hillcrest to roughly Fairview. Those are areas that are relatively stable. That's not to say there aren't homes that need to be raised in those areas. They tend to be fewer. The North Riverdale Planning District, east of Main Street from Ridge to the northern city limits between Main and Riverside. There's quite a few homes up there, particularly nestled closer to the North Main Street corridor. We find that there's more stability in North Riverdale as you proceed eastward towards Riverside Drive. So there's quite a bit to do there. Santa Clara and Five Oaks, not surprisingly, continue to be areas of concentration with the demolition resources that we have. Five Oaks, I guess I would sort of talk about it for a moment. Well, there's a significant amount of demolition proposed there. Our planning division, who is also a recipient of American Rescue dollars, is going to be involved in some single and two-family rehab, as well as potentially some infill in the Five Oaks area. I did mention that part of our $14 million demo award does include $2.4 million. Our hope is that we'd be able to stabilize maybe up to 30 or 35 single family structures, in terms of, providing, some very basic stabilization. In this case, we're talking about structures that are pretty significant architecturally, or through other measures. We're putting a roof on a structure whose roof is compromised would make a lot of sense. We realize we're not going to be able to stabilize. We're going to have to be very, very judicious about what our selection is, but that is part of what we're looking at, is stabilizing significant structures.
Real quick, while you're talking Five Oaks, and I guess this might apply to other people too. Do you have a map of some of these locations that you could at some point share with us?
Yeah, I think at some point, we're going to be in a position to share that information. There's still some fine tuning going on as it relates to, and there's something of a matchup that occurs here. As mentioned, these different programs, two being internally based demolition programs, two being externally based. In some cases, they have, very different criteria in terms of qualifying. There are things that desperately need to be torn down in some places that, for example, they're not in qualifying CDBG areas, and then ARPA, the program coming out of Washington, it has its own criteria, and we work closely with our contacts through the Office of Management and Budget, as who we have some reliance on in the interpretation of American Rescue Program guidelines.
Carl, and actually right at that point, Matt, I think that was your question, was the coordination and limitations, and that good question, because that is exactly what we've been doing here. Is before kind of going forward, like Bill said, he didn't put up a map, is we have been mapping them, but internally saying like, okay, what's the worst of the worst? What is ARPA eligible? Because we want to make sure that we are trying to get as many properties as possible. So let's say we don't want to waste, I guess, funding on a property that could have been uniquely funded through one of these other sources. So we're looking at, again, the CDBG, the general fund, the ODOD, and then ARPA. And we're truly trying to say, let's break these out to make sure that we do not, again, misallocate money in an area that could have easily been picked up over here. So that is what's going on in terms of compiling that data. You guys have heard that the inspectors have been out sweeping the communities, for nuisance properties. Again, not always to demo, but just to kind of get on our radar. And then we've been turning that information over to the planning division so that they can start putting together some really, really good maps around visualization of where is our issues, where are our funding sources, limitations, guidelines. And I think, again, coming back to Shelley's, Dickstein's kind of guidance, what is most impactful, so all of those things are going into consideration, Matt. And I think I wanted to kind of address it as Carl was on that point. And Lindy, I'll get to your questions when Carl is completed with his.
Right. I know part of what there has been a lot of anticipation about the rollout of ARPA, and we had decided sort of as a first project in ARPA, we wanted to sort of focus on the so-called fire piles, which are pretty significant in number, and they impact the entire city on a relatively equal basis. And that remains our intent, is to sort of as a first pass project with ARPA, that'll be our first step. Under ARPA guidelines, while there was originally some geographic limitations that related to demolition under ARPA, those have there's been clarity received that now allows for ARPA potentially or conceivably to be used on a citywide basis. So that's a level of flexibility that we think is positive.
Yeah, I think on that note, for all of you that have been following this or wondering why it has taken so long, when ARPA originally kind of came out and what Mayor Whaley had presented, was kind of that guidance. Like, it was a limited area. These were our qualifying areas. Well, then they revised the guidance, say, like, if it's a blighting influence on a community, it could be done, but it had to be replaced like 1-to-1. Well, then they clarified, and we just don't have the funds to do that. And so that kind of changed what we could do. Well, then they dropped the requirement of creating a new housing unit, saying that if it was blighting it, you're not expected to create a new housing unit. So, I think I can maybe understand a little bit of the frustration of the community. And I know, talking to the Dayton Daily News, same thing, like, oh, how hard is this? Well, when they keep changing the things, it keeps changing our work, because we're like, well, let's say we're going to do 1,000. But when they said, oh, you have to have a 1-to-1, well, then that dropped it down, because if you had to have the money to put in, well, then, when they change it where you don't have to have a 1-to-1 if it's a blighted influence. And so then that brought it back, so we've been going back and forth, but I guess trying to be just clearer. And that's why I'm appreciative of Mike and the community engagement team for doing this, because that is why we are where we are, where we are on track with a pretty good plan, but it's not set yet, because, again, trying to manage these various guidelines and make sure that, the last thing I'd want as a resident is to be told, hey, great news, we're coming for this, and then have the guidance change and then realize we have to backtrack on that. And so yeah. I know for a lot of you, either dealing with fire piles, and that one we were really quiet about, because that was being reviewed. We put that forward because we knew that took very little thought about. We're like, if we can use ARPA for fire piles, this would give us that chance to really get these things up and gone. And the consultants, the federal government, they were him and Han. And so we were quiet until we got kind of the go ahead from the consultants, from the Treasury, that, yeah, a fire pile is an eligible thing, because we knew that those are things. But yeah, we've been, like I said, it's been tough, because, again, we just didn't want to make a promise to a community and then have to kind of come back on it. So trying to manage this changing guidance with both our data and the need out there. So that's a little bit of the insight around that.
Steve, I maybe forgot to mention something. All the areas that I mentioned, I just realized are generally north of the river, which certainly, there are areas of the city east, such as Burkhart, where a great deal of attention is going to be paid in terms of providing some much needed stabilization through demolition. In addition to Burkhart, Springfield, which is the which is on the north side of East Third. We'll be targeting a certain number of properties over there for demolition. Fortunately, for the areas south and east of the river, we see the market really more at play than we do in certain parts north of the river, and that's really our challenge. And I say this as a north of the river resident as well. That's certainly part of our challenge is sort of broadening the impacts of market viability in all parts of the city.
So one of the things that I guess maybe give you a bit of a heads up, and we'll be communicating this through Verletta's team. As we have been compiling this information, one of the items that has come forward is that the Dayton Daily News has been requesting to get the nuisance list. And we have for years, and I will say somebody prior to being on city staff, I also was like, why isn't it public, why isn't that more of a public transparent thing? And then having come on board and gone through the Denny Zimmer School of why not, knowing some of the concerns around disclosing it, we after consulting with law and obviously around the transparency around ARPA and the fact that we are developing things that we've never developed before, that is creating a public document, public record that we would be required to disclose this, that in consultation with Shelley and Public Affairs, we will likely have to release that. Our feeling though is that we'd actually like to do it in a way where we would allow those of you in the community who have been either asking for it or wanting to see that to actually be part of that first. Because because the Dayton Daily News has asked for it doesn't mean we necessarily have to follow that procedure. We can kind of control how we share that. There's going to be kind of a with great power or with great knowledge comes great power or something. An education, because one of the things Denny has shared is the last time we did this, there were a lot of community helpers that decided to go burn down properties to help save, to help obviously reduce our backlog. Well, the problem with that is by doing that, and if we do not have an asbestos survey, we now have to spend twice as much to remove that. And one of the things that we're going to be sharing with the community and with the Dayton Daily News is that, yeah, I guess you could probably go on and publish the whole list, exactly where all these properties are, knowing that just because you're on the nuisance list does not mean it's going to be demoed. We all know, right? It's not a demo list because we've had properties graduate from the nuisance list. For Fred's neighborhood, 42 Yale, the Traxler Mansion is on the nuisance list, but we're not demoing that. So trying the education around nuisances does not mean demolition. So please don't go burn everything down because you think that you're gonna help accelerate it. Because our fear, but obviously the law is that if we were to witness that, it would reduce our reach through these funds. We would be spending more to remove these through the EPA's guidelines. And so actually it could be a flop. I mean, we could actually just sink a lot of money into more expensive demolition removals than we had planned. So we're working on that. You will all a message will be coordinated through Verletta about being part of that release. I know that it will affect some of you, and I think that you might see it from our eyes too, right? That having that out there, exposing these properties that may not have been public otherwise, creates a vulnerability for your community. And so we're going to really try to manage this in a way of, understanding what this list means, understanding there are ways, we even talked to the Dayton Daily News, there are ways to visually show the list without specifically showing the list. That I think neighborhoods and the public could get a sense of where the issues are without pinpointing exactly which house. I can't control though, if they opt to just do the whole front page of Dayton Daily News with every address. It'd be unfortunate, but there would be, we wouldn't have much say over that. And so I did want to use this as a venue to say that you will all be part of this release again, because after extensive review, we don't have a legal grounds to withhold that because we are developing these documents for ARPA that will actually specify these properties. So I just want to give you that heads up. And I don't know if anybody has thoughts or even ideas that might help us form how we're going to release that or share that, but I'm all ears. And if not, if you want to do it offline, obviously would be open to that as well.
Yeah, Steve, I just typed in a suggestion. I don't know if we have, and when you talk to the Dayton Daily News, just really stressing that if anybody enters these properties or goes on these properties, they're liable to a trespassing arrest. And then I don't know if we have enough money in the boarding budget. We've never put no trespassing signs on. So I don't know if there's a way to do that. But I think, all these, abandoned house people who go in constantly to the Traxler to do YouTube videos, I don't think a lot of people realize that they're breaking the law by entering a public nuisance property, plus putting themselves at risk. So somehow getting the paper and other media outlets and social media to emphasize that.
Well, and I think Monica's a good point. I think for everybody's benefit, although we just kind of shared this with Monica and Fred, was that even if you own the property and it's boarded, you still need to come to us to get a authorization to enter form. So once we put our blackboards on a property, even if you are the rightful owner, you are not allowed to just take that board off and go in. You need to come to us, get the form, explain, who or what will be entering the property. But yeah, I think that's one of the things, Monica's a good point, is looking at how we currently board and whatever we post, and maybe enhancing that to where really understanding that no trespassing is not just for the public, but or for anybody associated with the property, whether you have a mechanic's lien on it or you're the owner, that you cannot just go in there at your leisure. So I think there's gonna be a little bit of a change in maybe some of that posting, because you're right. If that does go out, really making it clear that it is trespassing, whomever goes in there other than approved by the city. All right, there was another question. Hold on one second. So Stan, what we're referring to is arsonist. There was a spree a number of years ago that they took it upon themselves, truly thinking that they're helping us, like accelerate it, like, well, I'll get it down, we'll burn as much off. And one, no, the fire department does not do controlled burns in the city of Dayton, so that is not an option. Two, no, you burning it down does not help us at all, because you've now just doubled the cost of removing that property. And honestly, yeah, what it might do is it might affect our ability to really get to, like Matt said, a more severe property, where even though severe, we have to sometimes deal with the fire burns sometimes, or put resources there that we had not budgeted for. Mike, actually, let me go to the top real quick, just bouncing back. So Lindy, yes, we would either myself, Carl, the supervisors, or the conservation specialist would be willing to come to neighborhood meetings. Let's just work with your community engagement person to pinpoint exactly what your need is. If it's very specific around inspection, maybe the specialist. If it's a broader issue that affects multiple neighborhoods, maybe the supervisor. But one of us, somebody from the city, would be willing to come out. Lindy, your other question was, do the inspectors go into backyards? If not, why? Yes, they do. Our inspectors are authorized to go onto the property. This is a great question, though. We are going to change a little bit about right now. It is a mixed bag. It had been a mixed bag that the inspectors might wear a branded City of Dayton shirt or a hat. Sometimes it's cooler, a jacket, though they weren't necessarily fully required. Under the last union contract, our inspectors union opted to go into a uniform agreement, not at their choosing. What that means is that they will now be required that, and we will be, we'll pay for it, but they will be required to have their outer layer be identifiable as a City of Dayton housing inspector, and to the point where they might be wearing imprinted safety vest. But with the uniform policy comes a more, it won't be the same shirt, same pants. There's a little bit of variations, polo shirts, but it will be City of Dayton emblazoned or monogrammed apparel, so that it is clear more than just wearing the small name tags of their car. So, but yeah, the reason why I'm encouraged by this is because they do go onto properties. They do where they can traverse people's backyards and either look at openings in the properties. And so, you know, if you have a situation where there are cars or excessive cars, you know, notify us, whether it's through the call center or through the inspector. One of the things that we want you guys to engage with inspectors. At the same point, we don't necessarily want you to have to go report, like pick up the phone and call on your inspector directly. I know it seems like we're kind of redirecting you when we say, oh, put it through Dayton Delivers or the call center, but that actually does put it into the system. And so when you call in, either it then pulls our supervisors off their duties to then have to go transfer that from a call in the system, where if it goes through Dayton Delivers or the call center, it automatically transfers over and then it gets assigned out to that inspector. So I know that you guys are all pretty savvy with Dayton Delivers, and I will say, I mean, even as a resident myself, I use, I mean, it is the simplest way. It does get to us. So, you know, you don't even have to wait to pick up the phone, just put it through there or the call center and we'll get that. But yeah, that would be a situation where excessive cars in the back, they could respond to that. Stan had a question. What are the plans to get the properties you're going to stabilize inhabited? So Stan, good question. You know, our first task, you know, that we had was to buy them more time. And so we are engaging with Land Bank. We are engaging with the Treasurer's Office. We had a great meeting with Treasurer McManus himself and his entire kind of staff, not every employee, but that are focused around the issues with especially nuisance of properties and vacants and whatnot, about just being better, talking to each other and making sure that they weren't selling properties that either were on the nuisance list or that weren't vetted by us. So part of our goal is that, you know, yeah, if we can stabilize it, what is the role that either the Land Bank or the Treasurer's Office could play with either transferring that property into the you know, deposit foreclosure program or the Board of Revisions, where it isn't fully vetted yet, but that would be the goal. But our thing is that alone wouldn't be a criteria for us not to stabilize a property. So even if we didn't have a plan for inhabiting it, getting a hole in a roof patched is priority, and just buying that property more time, so that even if the plan materializes 3 years down the road, we didn't lose 3 years to the elements. And so I would say that we are not necessarily saying that it has to have a plan for it being inhabited for us to take action. We are going to take action regardless, so that way we don't have further deterioration. Non-functional NDCs are estate or deceased owners. That seems to be our bag of usual culprits, right? Homes tied up in probate, so on and so forth. You know, I don't have a good answer on that. That is something that, again, talking to the Treasurer's Office about what do we do? How do we speed up the process for some of these properties where there is a non-functional entity, in a state of a deceased owner? You know, how do we move this through? Because I know on my block, there's a property just it's in great condition, but the gentleman died. There was no real direct estate, and it's just been tied up. And you know, and this is one of the ones where, yeah, we are losing properties just through the legal process, through it kind of going through the courts. There is just nobody maintaining it in the meantime. Mike says, who will own the property after demolition? That would go back to kind of the same things, Mike, where just because we demolish it does not necessarily mean that we would own it. In circumstances, you know, we would look at where does it make sense either to bring the land bank in, transferring the lot. We are looking at possibly resuming putting liens on the property, so that if we demolish it, we assess that cost of the property so that the owner just can't turn around and, you know, we took care of this thing and then they turn a lot that cost of it. That I will say that's up in the air, because we do have to look at how ARPA views in a way program income. So if it's $10,000 to demolish it, we put that on the property, and let's say somebody comes in and buys that property and we get paid back. often when you have stuff like ARPA, when you're getting money from the government, when you get like, if we were to get money back from somebody, it's kind of tricky because we don't just get to say, oh, thanks federal government for giving us money to demolish it. Oh, and thanks future buyer for giving us money to buy the lot. We sometimes have to report that money back to the federal government. So it's viewed as program income.
Matt, you have a question?
Yes, I was actually gonna follow up on Mike Schomer's question of who owns the property after demolition. You know, and you asked at the beginning of this question sequence if there was any suggestions, and I was gonna suggest that you do put liens on the property, but then forgive them for you know, local ownership, because specifically neighbors to any of these properties. Part of the problem we face here in Old North Dayton is when you get these properties, there's no sense of ownership, and the neighbors would, if they had even an inkling of a hope that they might own it one day when it's cleared off, then they will watch it. They'll take care of it. We see that here all the time if there is hope. But right now, you know, there's so many out there that just are, you know, the neighbors are hopeless. And they won't tell you. They, you know, if you get down and talk to them, that's what the holdup is that they're afraid the properties are going to be sold. And we've had them through lot links. I've done it through the depositor foreclosure. Properties are, you know, I put up my own money and to watch somebody outbid me at an auction, sheriff's auction, and I'm still looking at the same abandoned structure over a year later after it's been sold, when I wanted to go buy it just to tear it down and make a lot, just to make it look better.
Yeah.
So,
No,
you
Matt,
know, by putting,
we're going to do that. That was something even Shelley had said that, yeah, if there is a viable either neighbor or entity that has a plan, and let's say it is let's say we do a boarding on a roof, right? We patch a roof. If you come in and say, here's my plan, we're gonna do this, and here's the resource I have, yeah, we're gonna waive those liens. I mean, but if our goal is we were not gonna just tee up this property for some of our usual suspects to say, well, thanks, city, and now, you know, no, we're not gonna waive that lien if they don't have a plan for it. And so that is the one flexibility we have in our things, that we can assign those liens and we can waive them based off of the merit of the applicant or buyer. So yeah, because we're not, I don't want to saddle somebody with a $12,000 demo if they have a really legitimate plan that the neighborhood backs and it would benefit the community.
Bill.
Quick question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fred.
Steve, back to the trespassing issue. I'm sure you're more than well aware of our repeat offenses at one of the properties in our neighborhood. Have you guys ever considered doing something like they do for illegal dumping and mounting cameras at sites that are repeat problems?
Yeah, I know that we don't have that technology, but John Parker does. And I would say that if John wasn't already so stretched with the need, by the community, I mean, John's a really great partner where I doubt that we could borrow his, but it may be something that we could look into to where like the cost and the maintenance of it or the contract there. So for everybody, even though we're all one city organization, sometimes we will pay each other to do services that we don't want to do. And so it might be that we contract through John Parker's group to, we provide the money to purchase cameras and for them to monitor the cameras on our behalf to crack down on that. Because for everybody's benefit, one of the issues we were having is this property that the homeowner believed that they can come and go. They were compromising the boarding every time that they were coming and going. And again, now that we have a little bit clear that they were the ones probably doing it, we, reaching out to the family or to their respective representatives about notifying them, because we're going out boarding, and then it's like, oh my God, if you are going in, taking the boards off, coming and going, no wonder, you were setting us back. So, in the situations though, where we don't always know who's doing it. Yeah, I think the cameras could be a solution. I'd have to talk to John about what that cost looks like, whether he could even manage it on our behalf. I mean, obviously we'd have to pay, but to look at where there are high profile sites and repeated things that, you know, maybe taking it from that approach.
Bill,
It would be helpful for
I
sure.
agree. I agree.
Now, back to the question about some of the properties stuck in probate. And that's, you know, a real thorn in our side in Five Oaks, particularly in one of the many historic districts, you know, the Squirrel Historic District, because there's a guy who's a real neighborhood nuisance, but he's sitting on, you guys probably ran into him, sitting on 3 properties that he's intentionally held in probate, so that as long as he pays the taxes, he doesn't listen to, you know, what you all do, you know, pays taxes, maybe pays fines, and he's hoarding and destroying, you know, historic properties. So whatever you could do legally, you know, to pry this out of the hands of the zombies and people like him who are taking advantage of it, that would be really, really helpful.
Bill, send me those addresses. I think, like I said, it probably is on our radar, but I want to just make sure that we are stepping up kind of our enforcement of it. And one of the things I share with Monica and Fred was, especially around the historic properties, it's like, you know, Monica brought up the shame boards, and like I go, in some of our situations here, it's not always the big bad out of town investor. Sometimes the people are right in our backyards, and I'm like, you know, we're kind of limited, but there's times like, you know, I want to get up and say, well, you know what? And off camera to the media, I said, well, here's the address. Why don't you go with the camera? You know, when I came from Baltimore, that was pretty common. The news went right to the person out in their suburban home, or sometimes, you know, for our sake, there's a few where there was a correlation where you had somebody who a beautiful structure had to come down, and they were right in one of our neighborhoods in one of our historic districts. And so it's like, I asked the media, I said, I go, it's fine coming to me or Todd or Shelly, but I go, I can easily find, you can find the owner. Why not just go to their front door and ask them why? You know, why are they allowing this or permitting this? I go, you know, that's, you know, because to the degree is some of these beautiful things that we've had to take down, we never owned. And I will own that moving forward, we've really have been stepping up the enforcement and really kind of getting after these. And that is something we can control, is just continuing to hit people. But for some of the ones that have been in the past, it's like, there is just negligent ownership. And when they're not out of town, why, it's like, why the media isn't going to that directly to that individual or entity and asking those questions.
Well, and the guy I'm thinking about, your inspectors have, I know, ticketed him before. And also Public Works has had to deal with him before too. So I'll send you the addresses there, you know, step that up, but
Yeah.
he is beyond embarrassment. He doesn't care.
So it's probably a good tie-in, unless somebody for the next item, which was Mike, what's our time? Do we have 30 more minutes?
We technically 10 to 11. I would say, I think to Monica's question, we probably should do the tracker at a future meeting.
Well, I'll do it really quick, but
Okay,
I just
that's
want to
fine.
say, we'll do this one the next meeting. I am, Todd and I have a meeting with law. So the civil, the addition of civil prosecution is still going on. It is, I will say it's been way more than what we ever imagined in terms of getting it right. But I know that a number of you have knowledge and you have ideas from elsewhere. And one of the things we're going to discuss with Adam Loggle today is about, you know, maybe bringing together some of you for just a work session. I trust Stan. I know, you know, housing law. I know Monica has provided some examples elsewhere. And so, you know, before we, you know, we wanted to have kind of something to show you, but maybe having that conversation. All right, take a look. Here's what we're thinking, because, you know, Bill, one of the questions, one of the things with civil was that it does open up our ability to go to receivership. And so, you know, we want to make sure that whatever we are drafting, it I want this kind of question. What does this do for probate? What is this like? What is this giving us the legal outlet to get something around some of the confines we currently have with just criminal? So I will table civil for another meeting, but let me quickly go to the tracker, because I do want you all to see this, because it is out there now. So I was gonna.
While Steve's pulling that up, I will say, like, I feel like we usually go a few minutes over. So if you do have to hop off, no big deal. Like I said before, we're recording this. So if you do need to leave and want to watch this section later, you can. And I will say, I've snapped a picture of some of the other questions that have come up, and I'll make sure that appropriate staff respond to those. Tasha, Monica, Lindy, some of those we can definitely discuss.
All right, there's a couple of ways. I always say bookmark it, but you can just do DaytonOhio.gov housing tracker, but under housing and inspections, housing inspection, Dayton housing tracker. You go there, and like I said, it'll pull this up. You can select this. So I love this one. It's very visual. Now remember, this is just for code enforcement issues. I will share with you the other one. Basically, it's the overview. One of the questions we had was, why the last 6 months? We can look into that, about tweaking it a bit. Reason being is, if it was unlimited, the map would just be one big blob. And so we're trying to really keep it clean of maybe open cases. And so as a case closes, it will be removed from the map, but it will go to our other portal. So this disclaimer here, if you ever, or if your residents ever have additional information off one, please call us. Happy to kind of like go a step further. And then just remember that you always submit these through the call center or the Dayton Delivers portal. Okay. So right now, this is the, if you haven't seen visual, obviously zoomed out, a couple of ways to navigate. If you go up here to the upper left, you can go specifically by an address. Over here to the right, you can pick it by neighborhood. And then down here is just the current list of ongoing complaints. So if you were curious just to see what things have been looking like, you can sort this table. So you'll see what has come in here across the city under since yesterday, August 1st. Just so you know, we get this batch at I think around midnight. So the Dayton Delivers and the call center sends them over at midnight. So it is not real time. Like I submitted something this morning, I don't see it. You won't. We will get it after it batches tonight. So we get everything from the previous roughly close of business day. So you can sort it by here, sort it by number, neighborhood. Let's go to though, we can sort just by a neighborhood. So I just picked Cornell Heights. So you look in here. So again, you have a visual. Down here, you have a table listing of all of the complaints in Cornell Heights. You can zoom in and it'll start breaking those dots down. You can hover. So here I'm hovering. I selected that 2900 Princeton Drive. I can see that it was June 14th. A warning notice was issued. It's an active, so meaning that we don't have compliance. So it's active because the issue is compliance. You will see the description. It's a grass complaint and then the neighborhood. There's some additional, no, that's not. Same thing down here. Another way you could go about it, you can scroll the table here. You can sort it by the address. But again, the idea behind this is that you can either sort by the map, you can sort by a specific address, or you can do your entire neighborhood to get a sense of, what is occurring. Any questions on just this? I really am loving this because I think they did, working with our GIS group, it is informative, it's not overly complicated, and it gives you multiple ways, again, to kind of find that property. And again, so here's the thing, and I don't want this to be viewed as we don't want to talk to you, but the hope really was to alleviate call volume at the call center, that residents would go here first, look at it, and oftentimes, and again, whenever they want to do, hopefully get the information they need. Okay, it's tracked, somebody's responded to it. But yeah, if you have additional questions, please call us, reach out. But I don't blame people. We didn't have a way for people to know this. So they were having to call into the call center. So we're really encouraging people to use Dayton Delivers in the call center and also use this to kind of track that. You'll see here that here, like on these statuses, active, it's still kind of open after July 22nd. Some are closed, and it'll tell you why. So again, we're hoping that people really get familiar with it and feel that it's transparent enough for their needs.
Steve, what does not valid mean under action taken?
So what happens is, and it's maybe not the best, but a lot of times if 3 of you call in a complaint, Dayton Delivers or the call center registers all 3. And what happens is the supervisor will go through and find that they're all related to the same thing, that basically not bad. Well, sometimes not valid is that there is not an issue there. Other times it's a duplicate. And again, we will probably still tweak this, because I know that I'd be ticked if my complaint was not valid. And what not valid might mean is that 2 other of my neighbors already reported it. So instead of showing all 3, we will close out 2 and keep 1 open if they're all for the same grass complaint. So these are kind of the tweaks that we're making, is where maybe not valid is the right term. Maybe it is duplicate, or it is, something where it's indicative of it's closed because somebody else reported it. And then the idea behind this is that if somebody sees it reported, I know, then there's no need for you to report it. So if that complaint has already been lodged there, I would tell residents, if 10 of you flood our things, it doesn't change the process we follow. You only need 1. And if the inspector goes out there and cites someone that 1, having 10 additional doesn't add weight to it or whatever, because we just have to we have to just mark those not valid, because you just go off that 1, you cite it once. Now you can cite that 1 issue daily, but we don't need to have 10 submissions for that.
Can you extract reports from this, Steve, that would say these items have been resolved, or these issues have been resolved, or further legal actions are being taken on these properties?
So not yet, Fred. I know even Verletta staff had asked that, like on this table form. If I'm going, for the Verletta staff, if they're going into a meeting at Cornell Heights, if they could take this form and either sort it and then print it out. They haven't gotten that functionality, but it has been requested that that we could sort this and then also maybe print it or export it. So that is already been brought up by Verletta's group, is to have that functionality.
And then is there any description that says the property is vacant, or it's rental or owner occupied, or?
Well, so there is one, and again, we were trying to, so some things you won't see on here. We've hid some of the use nuisance. Well, I don't know if we hid it, we changed. So the problem is on our use nuisances, it was sharing too much information. So it would say drug house. So, we don't want the neighbors coming out with pitchforks and torches. We're trying to be mindful that obviously if somebody saw use nuisance, they could call us and we might be able to say it went before the use nuisance board or here's something, but we didn't want to leave it in kind of the informal language. So then the neighborhood freak, oh my God, it's, for those of you that know the use nuisance hearings, it's sometimes complicated. It may not be the landlord, it might be a tenant, it may be, and sometimes they're found not guilty. So we edited that one. There's not a ton of use nuisances, so it really wasn't impacting. But there was one up here. See, so you all know VPR is the vacant property registry. So what happens is this one got closed out because when it's in vacant property, the mortgage company's field servicer then responds to it. So we will close that out. John Carter sends it over to them. So that way they can, and they're usually pretty responsive. We get pretty good compliance from the field servicer. So that situation, but now granted, not everybody knows what VPR is. And it's kind of a good thing. We don't really want them to know what that is because that means it's a perfectly viable house that's going through foreclosure or something. And so we don't want people getting in there and stripping the house out while, it's working, navigating that process. But here's one, 1419 Lexington, boarding's requested, vacant structure open. So in that situation, that is on our list to board, either internally through our staff or through our future boarding contract. So again, where I think this is working is, okay, it is, we know, we're communicating back to the public that we are acknowledging that it's a vacant structure that's open and that the boarding has been requested. Not that it's, it's not been completed. So that way they can see that it is on our radar. It's just in the queue to be boarded up. And again, we are tackling that boarding through overtime on nights and weekends. Once the boarding contract's in place, that list will probably get accelerated. So even something from June 30th should get boarded much faster than what we're able to get to now. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to do one quick thing about the other portal. So as I mentioned, the map is really a 6-month snapshot. Once something is kind of either gets compliance or is responded to or closed out, that will kind of leave the map so that the map is kind of really reflecting more recent things. The other, okay, this is the Acella's other portal, and this now deals with building enforcement and planning. And the reason being is, so this comes with our Acela is what we use as our database. You can now check on building to see the status of a project. So if you believe somebody's working without a permit, before confronting them or us, you can go in here. So Fred, what's the property just on the other side of Broadway from Traxler? Is that
35 or 105?
105. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do.
That's 105 Oxford.
No. Where they're restoring it across from.
Oh, that's 104 Yale.
104 Yale.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a situation, everybody, where there is extensive renovation going on. It's in a historic district, so I'm sure there's concern to make sure that they have the COA, landmark approval. So we're going to go search. No, that's not. Is that 104?
Yeah, it's 104.
Oh.
Steve, since you can do a range, why not just choose 100 to 110?
I forgot.
I don't think there's been any violations reported on
No,
that.
no, when it comes to building services, this is all just the permitted process.
Huh.
So record number type. Just give us a bigger window here. Or is it 102?
I think it's 104, but it could be 102.
So here's a situation where so now what you're able to see on the building services one is the address, what exactly, so either it's a residential electric, plumbing, permit revision, okay, so on and so forth. Let's say that we can look here to see what the revision is. So it'll talk about the applicant or the contractor doing the work. So again, the idea is you can get this information on, again, to see if a project has permits, where he's working with permits. On the enforcement side, I'm not going to go through all this, but again, If you want to have a more lengthy history of code enforcement issues on a property, you will then use this site, and this will then take you into all of the, we'll just pick on. So here's a situation where, we're going through 42 Yale, and you can see then again, all of the numerous violations. So, and it goes back, let's see how far it goes back. You're going back even to 2017. So this portal will provide you the more extensive history. And then on the planning side, this will help you track cases. So Brad, it's all about you today. So and these have been front and center since we've been talking a lot about these. So here's the situation again. So I might have checked that 102 Yale had the necessary building permits, but I also can see, knowing that it's in landmarks, that if it's gone for the COA. So if you're a historic community, I will say landmarks is probably the biggest one on here in terms of records that'll come back, but this will obviously reflect other cases that Tony Kroger's group has. So they can go in here and get information about what is. I hope everybody finds this helpful. Again, that if you are sleepless and it's 2 a.m. in the morning, you can now go on here and just get that. You can get that one thing that was just nagging at you checked off, and then you can go back to bed. So the idea is that whether it's 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., that you now have a transparent portal to kind of go back through and get information you need off these.
Will that also show stop work orders that have been issued?
It pulls up everything.
Okay.
Lindy, that you asked about the capturing the page for the maps. That has been requested by the engagement team and others to be able, kind of like you get a police report for a neighborhood meeting. I think that was kind of our thought, is that you could kind of have like a housing inspection report similarly to provide to the neighborhood. So we'll say in progress. Steve, I think this is a really good question, and because I think you've addressed it. Can you talk about the housing inspection as it relates to commercial inspection, particularly in neighborhoods where you might have neighborhood businesses on the arterial roads that have violations that are negatively impacting the neighborhood?
So that's something that Carl's been focusing on. Since the start of the year, we've, did I stop sharing on this now? Okay. That's something that we've had Carl's been training, especially with the inspectors taking on zoning enforcement. And that really hits around, obviously corridor signage, other kind of aspects around there. So Carl, can you address kind of what you've been working on with the inspectors around the commercial inspection, or how we're touching on it with the zoning work? All right. Well, I will say that is where I would say, as we ease into some of the commercial stuff, that is how we're going about it, is tackling it first through the zoning aspects, especially on the corridors. And then the question is really, how we're going to tackle that with commercial inspections. Is that correct?
Is Mike Schomer, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I asked the question, and really it's just, how is the new housing inspections team going to focus on the commercial? Because those are some of the worst offenders: broken concrete, busted asphalt, trash in their parking lots. And it goes from one end of the city to the other when you drive, and that's what people see. And those businesses are constantly taking value from the community, but they're not putting back in. So yeah, I think there should be a heavy emphasis and focus on commercial zoning enforcement. I was just driving down Finley this morning, and all beside the Forge plant, their entire strip of concrete is all busted, full of trash. Their curbs are awful. And I mean, Finley, we got to clean that up as a city, the street itself, but it's their responsibility to take care of all that concrete. And, you know, I could go every neighborhood. I could give examples, Steve. And
That's a good.
now that we have that ability, are we going to maximize that?
Yeah, no, I wish.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was off the call. I was off the call for a moment, handling some other things, but I did catch the tail end of what Mike was discussing, if you want me to respond.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, we do have in place now, our housing inspection staff have the ability and are tasked to enforce the commercial zoning code. Most of the staff are still very much in the early stages of learning the zoning ordinance, while they have enforced the residential section of the zoning code as part of their previous duties as a housing inspector. They know less about commercial zoning codes. So part of what we're doing is we have periodic trainings led by myself that need to obviously occur with greater frequency and will. We are introducing a presence, though, a newfound presence on the main commercial corridors. I know there are several issues, Mike, that spring to mind, not the least of which a particular prominent business who, upon their kitchen expansion, despite putting in all the stormwater management of their parking lot, they never put the final course of asphalt, and that's being dealt with. Other commercial issues, yeah, I mean, I certainly understand what transpires on commercial corridors visually impacts the image of the neighborhoods behind those corridors. So all I can tell you is that we're looking to get our inspectors increasing at a higher level of preparedness to deal with, you know, the commercial issues.
And Mike, one of the interesting things, Carl, kind of working with Denny's team, we found out is that we have authority under our code and their nuisance that non-conforming business signs that are contributing, like, let's say, and there's a few places that I could point out too that are contributing kind of to a blighted effect on the community, that we actually can demolish the non-conforming sign, well, either with the building or separate from the building. You know, because a lot of times those are kind of a ghost, you know, a haunting kind of thing, of a former thing. And so avoiding kind of a conflict with future reuses of the space, and the business wanted then to retain the sign. The idea is that as these businesses are vacant, we can go in and cite the non-conforming sign as a blighted thing. And so small steps, it's not the total, like Carl said, it is something that we're going to ease. I mean, we are easing them into the commercial stuff. You're right, though, there's some pretty significant violations, and getting them up to speed with the commercial code, but then also tackling a few of these kind of fringe projects that might actually bring some aesthetic improvements to corridors, especially around signs. You know, we're thinking that it could actually have a great benefit for the corridors.
I appreciate those answers, guys. And I'm optimistic, but, you know, like with the getting them up to speed on commercial zoning, some of the stuff is pretty similar to the housing. If the building needs scraped and painted, if the concrete's busted, if they're like the non-conforming signs, you're 100% right. I can think of places where the businesses are active and they've gotten issues for non-conforming signs and the sign still stands. And yeah, so I know it's going to take time and it's a process, but I feel like that we have to train them. It's like, come on, some of this stuff is obvious. If their curbs and sidewalks are busted, that doesn't do it, right? If their buildings need painted, that they have to clean that up. If there's trash in the lot, they need an order for that. Yeah, there may be some finer nuances in there, but right now it's like some of that stuff does not need training. It just needs implemented. Start writing tickets or sending notices, especially to these.
Well, and part of what you're mentioning there isn't even zoning, Mike. That's just environmental. And that can be dealt with and should be dealt with in the established, in their established knowledge of the housing and the environmental sections of the housing code. What I'm talking about, we've struggled, for example, South Park Tavern, this organization helped facilitate their parking area, that the acquisition of the parking on Wayne Avenue. And, they've built the parking lot. They've incurred the greatest part of the cost of the project, but we can't seem to get that individual to get some landscaping, import some good soil that supports plant life, and get the landscaping in, and let's call it a day.
Yeah, I couldn't
So
agree more.
that's major source of frustration. But yeah. And we have an order out. Yeah.
Again, not trying to pick on them for doing something good. It's just having them follow through what we all agreed upon. So I just want to be clear that this isn't a, hey, thanks for making an improvement, we're going to come after you. Is that it is just having them follow through with what they had approved. And so, and because there's a number of things, these abandoned non-conforming signs, tire shops. I mean, this is something that the proliferance of tire shops that are not operating within the expected code. And so you're right, Mike. I don't know that. I mean, I think now that we're staffed up and it's a new area, but you're right. This is not a, hey, here's our 5-year plan. I think it is both. They gotta, as Carl's training them up, but getting out there, and because one of the problems is that as we've talked about within our staff is the more time we assign to something like, well, let's give it a 3 to 5 year window, either the worse the problem gets or the more deterioration. And so, a lot of times our inspectors are like, yeah, we are asking you to do 5 different things. Like, because urgency, when we kind of take a wait and see, let's see, we have houses that deteriorate beyond rehab. We have businesses that, just blight, their appearance blights it. So a lot of times when we're talking to the inspectors, it's like, yeah, we are asking to do 5 things simultaneously. Absolutely. And that's the urgency that we have to approach this.
Yeah, and I know Carl knows the issues, and he's been doing it for a long time. And even there's land use cases, and Carl mentioned one on here just now, that there's many land use cases where the people didn't follow up. South Park Tavern's one of them, right? And I appreciate that. And I do think that, honestly, from a community standpoint, when neighbors see businesses in such disrepair, it's one of those things that it's one of the reasons they don't invest in their own homes, because they're looking at those businesses saying, this looks this bad, and they're taking from us. And it's very discouraging, I think, to community members. And if we can get those investments, I think that it would have the opposite effect. People would be encouraged and want to invest in their homes. We'd have less housing inspection to do, perhaps.
I'm also equally concerned about some of these properties in neighborhoods that are being used outside and probably unknown for the most part to the city, being used outside of what zoning permits. We've got a couple or 3 group homes in our neighborhood that are not licensed, and they're operating under the radar. And I don't know how. I know 4 or 5 years ago, a couple of them we reported to the city, but the inspector was never able to verify the number of people living in the properties or what was going on there. How do we fix that kind of a situation?
Well, just so you know, residential group homes, they are permitted in our single family zoning districts as a matter of right for up to as many as 8 clientele. Usually it's limited to 5 because after 5, there's a change of use under the building code that triggers sprinkler fire suppression requirements. But our code, and it's rooted in, we're basically being told we're required to provide that by fair housing requirements to allow group homes within those numbers as a matter of right. They are required to get a zoning certificate. They do have to demonstrate licensing through, if it's a foster care group home, then they have to show that they're licensed through Job and Family Services, which we do require that. Now, if we have some that are out there that you question the numbers, let us know.
There are a couple in our neighborhood that are being used as adult reentry type properties, and I don't know how many people are in each of those properties, but I know they don't have a license, and I know the current owners of those properties. He also owns 612, the old fire station on Salem, and he recently requested purchasing the 2 lots on the properties that you guys. Yeah.
I'm aware of that. Yeah,
I
which isn't going to happen.
I talked to him that I gave him some information about the reality of those right now, which we don't have an interest in selling those for the time being. I want to say it's 11:30. And I know that Carl and I have another meeting. Anybody whose question you put in there, we're going to get with Mike. Mike we will draft up responses to those and get back to you. I'm sorry. I know that we already went over an hour, and I like this group because I think it's a pretty honest conversation about what we're up to, getting feedback, and obviously hearing from you all. So if you put something in the chat, Mike will get with us and we'll respond, and then we will work through Mike to figure out when is appropriate for us to kind of come back and kind of give you guys another update. So Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Carl. Our next meeting will be September 6th. September 6th at 10 a.m. I will continue to explore with Bill and others in-person meeting. We'll probably meet virtually next month. If you haven't been to the city hall lately or any city buildings, we do require masks. We're in offices right now, that's why we don't have masks on, but generally speaking, out and about, we do. So we'll probably be virtually next month, but I'll continue to look if that's still if the feedback is still we want to meet in person at some point. I definitely am up for that and willing to look at places where we can meet. So with that said, thank you everybody for your time today. And again, feel free to continue the conversation. Send me any questions, and I have all the comments and questions from our chat that I'll follow up with as well. So that said, everybody have a great day. Enjoy National Night Out.
And thank you guys for all you're doing.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here today, everybody.
Yeah.